So yeah, welcome everyone, and well, you know what you can expect. So basically, directed Meher at our students, um, you have sent quite a lot of really good questions, which we have forwarded, and so the plan basically is that we will ask your questions as far as we have organized them and see how far we get with that. If you do have, we'll see. If you have any follow-up questions, just, note them down or put them in the chat, and so we can, if there is time, address them afterwards. So we see how much time we do have for all your questions. That's basically the plan we do have.
Yep. Um, yeah, this is a bit of an anticlimactic start, I feel. But I'd say we hand off to Meher. Thank you, first of all, for being here. That's amazing that you're taking the time out of your pretty busy schedule, I think, just to talk to us about game development and the game industry and everything, and that you're introducing your own company. So it's a bit of advertisement, but thank you for doing that. That's really, really great. Um, would you like to start simply by introducing yourself, your company, who you are, what kind of background you have? And I think most of us are really interested in how did you get to the place where I thought, you know what, let me just start working in the game industry and sort of open my own company.
Right. So just a disclaimer, I'm not a programmer, I'm not an artist. I don't do any of the cool stuff. I run the business. So it could sound interesting to some of you. It could be very boring to others. Fair enough. But that's what my job is project management. I take care of everything that is not the creative side. But I do have a good partner who's my brother, and he takes care of all the creative things. He's the game director. Narek, he is self-taught 3D artist. Originally, we come from an animation and film background. He comes from an animation and film background. The only reason I say we is because we used to have a company together a long time ago where, again, I was doing the business and he was doing the creative stuff. And that's how kind of we learned how to work together. Fast forward, he ended up working for Pixar, and then he was doing other things, directing movies and stuff. And then I was in Scotland working for the Scottish government. I was managing a big government fund of millions of pounds. So I was giving money to a lot of organizations. And then I was working at the University of Edinburgh, doing again non-academic things. So all to do with management and social enterprise and things like this. And then one day my brother calls me and says, I want to jump into the gaming industry, but if you want to be my business partner, you're the only business guy I work with. I'm like, I have no idea what the business side of video games is. I've played games before, but let's jump into this. And we have lots of video game companies in Scotland. I can get to know them and learn how things work. So that's how we all started a few years back. While I was preparing the scene here under Keelworks, trying to understand the industry, my brother was learning how to work on Unreal Engine. And that's how we created our first prototype and signed a deal with Konami. And we released our debut title, which was Signal Guns Blazing. And here I am. Here we are talking about it. So just to mention also, I will be as honest as I legally possibly can, without getting myself into trouble. So I will try my best to answer everything, the questions that you have, in whatever honest way I can.
That's great. Um, I had to laugh about I'm answering those questions as much as I'm legally able to do
Yeah.
so. So that's a very nice addition to do that. Um, I'm going to start with something probably that's not really game related, but because you said you're working with your brother, and I think in one of our conversations before, and you said you're working with family. So I'm imagining, is it difficult to negotiate family and business on that side of things? Because I mean, I have no shade on my brother, but I'm not quite sure whether I would want to run a business with him, simply because there is this merging and blurring of lines. So maybe start with some kind of softball
Yeah, I
question
mean,
here.
the thing is that we have not only my brother, my uncle also does the music. He's the music composer, so he composes the music. The good news is that we all have different skill sets, but we complete each other. So it's very important to have that. If we were maybe in the same area, maybe we would have more fights or disagreements. But because I don't really deal with the creative side, that he's clearly in charge of the creative. So, and I'm clearly in charge of the business side. So we know where the line is. So I can, of course, go and give my opinion and say, I don't like this color. He can or he can or cannot take my point on board, but that's I know at the end of the day that's his call, And so far we never had a problem because this clarity of roles is clear. There's no such thing as one person is more important than the other. Without me, there is no business. Without him, I can't do anything. That's very, very clear. And as long as there is that relationship going on and the clarity is there from the very beginning, I think it should be okay. Because there's no like conflict of I'm gonna screw you over kind of it's like it's my brother, so who am I going to work behind his back, or there's no such fear, let's say.
Mm. That
It
sounds
works
good.
so far so good.
That's very good. So knocking on wood. But let's switch off or switch over to the more game side of things. Would you consider your first game to be a success for your company? Like overall, I mean, you're currently sort of still it's out now, etc. So do you think it has been a success, or do you think it's been a bit of a so-so kind of process, simply because it was your first game?
Yeah, of course. I mean, success depends entirely on context, right? So it's not just sales. So is the studio a startup or established? Is it the first title, or is it the 10th title? Was it the budget of the game 100K or tens of millions? Was the game delivered on time, on budget? Did the team need more funding to finish the game? All these are elements that I think it's important to to mention as a context. So in our case, so Keelworks was a kind of a brand new studio to start with. We signed with Konami, which it's a massive publisher. Usually indie studios, especially the startups, don't usually sign with big publishers. They sign with smaller publishers and then they make their way through it. So for us to sign with Konami while setting up a studio, recruiting, dealing with visas and all the rest of it was an undertaking. Delivered on time, on budget was a very important thing because a lot of even experienced teams don't deliver the games or are really late in delivering. The soundtrack, which again I mentioned, my uncle did, was done in-house. It was signed by Sony Music. Again, this is a big achievement, I think. We got an Epic Store deal, which was not easy to get. And through that deal, of course, we had millions of downloads, primarily, thanks to the Epic Store deal. But still, millions of people downloaded our game. If they're not interested, then millions won't download the game, especially when it's 20 something gigabytes. So, um, um, all limited physical editions. We had physical editions, I think, I don't know, 20,000 or something, was all sold out from day one. So we had strong Metacritic reviews from and online media buzz from professionals, which was great. And we had high production value, both from art and technical, which we are proud of. Now, the context. Exactly during the launch of the game, Konami's senior management changed and the new leadership basically cut all indie support. It's fine because usually change of priorities happen, but it's not fine when it's us involved and when you have a game out and when you have an agreement. So all indie support stopped, which means that we had a patch with over 100 fixes for the game, which was never approved, which was never released. We had that complete from week 2. And we then had zero marketing or PR support since launch. So that is the context that matters. So you're going to tell me, you're going to ask, so do you think Signy is successful? I said, well, within context, it accomplished what a first title for a startup is supposed to do. And I think more. It proved technical abilities, it delivered reliably. Establishing a studio it's not an easy undertaking. And of course, the industry validation through all the big partners, which is unusual for an indie startup. So if an investor or a gamer is going to come and say, the success of your game is based on the, I don't know, 70, 80,000 sales that you have on digital, and ignoring the context is a very limited way of looking at it, in my opinion. So yes, I'm proud of what we've achieved so
I
far.
think you should be.
Yeah.
I think you should be. Just a question. Did Konami approach you, or how does it work? Could you walk us through the progress, basically, or the process of how do you go from storyboarding and having a game to sort of ending up with Konami in this case?
So the thing is that because of our background of not having track record of other published titles, people were afraid at the very beginning of, when I was approaching them, talking to them. And remember, I come from a completely different business approach. So I was thinking of this like, what is going on? Because, there were a lot of management problems that I saw, I witnessed while talking to publishers. Put that aside, I was constantly getting this pushback about, well, you don't have track record of published titles and there's no online traction for your game, so it's not going to work. And based on that, I had to change my strategy. So we had to take a risk. So we had a playable prototype for Signy, and I thought, if you need online traction, let's try to get that, whatever that means. So when I asked a few publishers who were a bit more honest with us, they said for this game, maybe aim for wish lists. 3,000 wish lists is a good number. I had no clue if that was achievable or not, but went with it, created a small trailer, and got an IGN exclusive, which was great. And within 24 hours, we got over 13,000 wish lists, which was great. So then I took that and I took it to the publishers, and obviously then I reversed the roles. Like publishers started knocking on our door, which was the main aim of what we did. And then I got two other deals actually, and Konami was also talking to us. Of course, Konami was somebody like I wanted to progress with, and that's how we got to evaluate, to negotiate the contract, which took ages, by the way. And while negotiating the contract, the president of Konami changed, and then I had to renegotiate the contract under new evaluation strategy. So it was a tough, long period. But remember, during this time, we had already announced the game. So people, when we released the game, already thought that, oh, this game has been in production for 4 years now. Like, it's not really true. And it's not really fair on the developers because, while it was announced, people forget that, there was time waiting for the negotiations, time for production actually happened 2 years. It took for Signy to finish exactly. And then we had to wait a bit more for the physicals to be out, for the testers, for all that stuff. So that delayed the game a bit more, but production was 2 years. And that's how we got Konami, if I answered your question in a bit of a loop, but yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a mutual approach, so to speak, in some way.
Well, yeah, because we had to actually prove that we had followers or whatever. So that's important when it comes to, especially this first title, when you don't have really track record. I understand why they say that, although I also think that people need to not be risk managers. They should be creative investors and see potential, even if it's like on a piece of napkin, even if there is no playable. But that's another point of view. That's my take on things. If you're in this industry and you're scouting for the potential, you need to be able to see it by asking the right questions, by, not just everything comes on a silver plate. And I think that's a key observation. One day I'll give a talk to publishers about what my experience is, but now
I mean, because you said, written on napkin and having the right idea. Who comes up with the ideas? Are you involved in this progress or in this process at all? Or is it something that your brother does and then he just provides you with a
that
final?
is his job. Yes, you're right. I mean, that's the creative aspect of it. Of course, I'm not completely detached from the whole thing. At the end, of course, I also was project managing on a high level Signy, so I'm familiar with what was going on the ground. But in terms of the ideas, it's the game director's job. So he comes up with, for example, what the next game is going to be. So he has some options. We talk about them. I cover the business or marketing aspect of things. I said, maybe it's not going to work with this. I ask some friends, and then that's my input. But at the end of the day, it's a collective decision, but mainly it's him who comes up with the ideas.
Okay. Just because we were talking about publishers and you've mentioned the Epic Store, how much of an importance do publishers have as well as Steam, as well as the Epic Store? So how important is it to get your foot in the door when it comes to these sort of institutions, if you will?
For Epic Store, it's an important deal that could be very important for small studios. It's important because you get visibility. It's important because big publishers like Konami prefer prestige. This Epic shows your game. It's great. So there are different factors. It's not always on the surface level. So on that basis, I would say, if you're talking about the Epic deal that we got, for example, is I knew about it. I was supportive of it, but I didn't really necessarily know about I wasn't agreeing about the timing of it, and the communication needs to be better. because it's important to be fair on people buying the game, that there is a game deal happening on Epic Store. That I think that's inevitable to communicate better when it comes to these things. But I think Epic Store it's is important. When it comes to Steam, I mean that's where all the players are. I think it's important for and that's when the market follows. It's important to have visibility on Steam, and it's is the number one PC place. I don't is that was that your question? Sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
No, you
Was
answered it.
that
Um,
okay?
I think there are two questions from now on. One, I'm going to ask, then, and I think Martin is going to take over to ask about Steam and how that works. What I'm wondering, simply because you mentioned that you had sort of testers and early reviewers, so I'm wondering how important are reviews in general? So how much importance does it have to have good reviews or good score on certain websites, for instance? Is that relevant? And do you even address these reviews, or do you just sort of read some of them and go like, this is more or less something we need to decide? Or do you include these kinds of, I don't want to call them issues, but these kinds of responses from players, etc.?
So first of all, Steam ratings, if you're referring to, they do matter. They are important, of course. They are important for various reasons: visibility, algorithm, reputation, even investor confidence. They just go and check the ratings. That's very important. Now, do I read reviews? Yes, I do, but not obsessively. It's important to balance feedback with your original vision, right? So that's very important. It's kind of easy to skim through and disregard the kind of the non-relevant feedback, which is not really constructive feedback, and it doesn't really help. There are a lot of angry people online for various reasons they are angry, but in general, and that impacts on the overall score too, of course. So the negative reviews fall into several categories or buckets, if I want to put them. So there is the strange ones, the kinds who don't like Konami and we're expecting the next eFootball game, so they write negative reviews or they want the next greatest. Or others kind of simply don't like these kind of games. It's like saying I don't like oranges, and this is an orange, so I don't like it. So I'm like, it's not relevant, you know. So there are a lot of such things, and they are counterproductive, and actually harms also the smaller studios, but they don't see that because they see Konami. Then you have the minority groups who play classic arcade shoot 'em up games from the 80s and 90s. Their computers probably cannot play Signy. It doesn't run on their computers, but still they expect a traditional arcade bullet dodger. And how come this is not that? And Signy was never meant to be that. So they come up with that you're not following our shmup rules. I'm like, well, I didn't design this game to follow your shmup rules. I didn't sign a deal because of that. So you go make that. I'm not gonna make it. And then you have the players who are upset at Epic Store giveaway. So they're like, we don't like Epic Store. So here's a negative review. And people who, this is genuine from our research from the reviews. And then people who just skip tutorials and then say it's impossible. So, you know, even though the tutorial teaches more mechanics, it doesn't matter. But having said that, of course, I'm not trying to defend it, trying to justify the negative reviews. There are also some really legitimate reviews. We also have, by the way, a lot of positives. I'm not talking about them now because you specifically focused on negative. I'll go with it. And it creates more actions. And then they have the legitimate kind of people who really thought the game was difficult or the UI concerns, which were all kind of addressed in the patch. The majority of them were addressed in the patch, and the majority of these things that we addressed were from the feedback that we received. So we did listen to those which were relevant to listen to. Like, for example, the UI concerns are valid because we already knew that before we released the game. We just didn't have time to fix the UI issues, and we just thought, okay, we'll leave this for the patch. So we just crammed everything into one page in the upgrade page. If you go into it, you're like, what is this? It's too much going on. Even sometimes I get confused. So this was already planned that was going to be fixed. I'm not going to sit here and just tell you everything is perfect. Of course not. That's how any game would work. You've got updates and updates and updates, and the game becomes better and better and better. And these are all relevant. Now, the frustrating part is that discounts without a patch equals more cheap purchases, but same issues, which means more negative reviews. So that doesn't help. And that's what happened, sadly. That's where you see more people are buying the game because it's discounted crazily. And then the same feedback is coming back, most of these which are tackled in the patch. Another observation I would give, which is interesting is that people often see the logos, the big logos, Konami, Epic, Sony Music, and they see the high quality graphics, and they think we are a AAA studio, and it's kind of they treat us as that, which is unfair on the game and unfair on the devs as well. They forget, and they kind of have a bit more aggressive approach, whether it's feedback or otherwise. And for example, we have two full CG cinematic trailers well, not trailers, intro and outro in the game. Usually CG cinematics cost a lot of money. Indie companies don't ever do it. But we did it before even Konami. Actually, it's done by my brother alone, and his girlfriend supported him. And that is entirely there, which is a valuable thing that they got free of charge. And it's there. But when people see that, they're like, oh, this is a AAA budget game. It's not true. So I had to say that because that inevitably also impacts on this. Again, we go back to the context. Context is important, and that's why Konami sent the camera crew to do a behind the scenes to here in the studio because of this particular reason. I don't know if that helped a lot, but that's PlayStation released the first episode of the making of and stuff like that. But it was okay.
That
I hope I
sounds like
answered your question.
yes, it sounds like it was more than okay. Actually, what was one of the most helpful feedbacks or reviews you got? One that, sometimes you get feedback and one of them just kind of that sits with you, something that doesn't really let go. So what was perhaps one of the most
We
helpful
had
ones?
many such good feedback from
Yeah.
the time when we started getting testers involved. We really had good feedback about the movement of the ship. It's also technically more difficult. Sometimes they say something and then we get back and like, listen, it's very difficult to do this. And then they're like, oh yeah, they are also technical. So it's interesting. We had that relationship with some testers, and the difficulty, constant balancing. We had that was one of the things that we got from them. Some things in co-op, I don't remember the details, but we also fixed some things in the co-op gameplay, and other things that aren't just released, but they are in the patch. Thanks to we have over 100 of them. Most of them are because of the feedback that we got. So sadly, you won't be able to see them even if I tell you, but they're there. I'm still hopeful we'll get it out soon.
Sounds good. I'm just going to hand over to Martin, who is on the top right here.
Anyways, yeah.
I mean, for me, not for you,
Yeah, it was
obviously.
probably mirrored. Anyways, yeah, you just mentioned the giveaways and the discount on Steam and Epic. Are you in any way included in these decisions, or is it something the publisher and the platform decides?
Uh, well, I am included, depending on the contract, usually when it's talking generally speaking. So the 90% Steam discount, um, I know that Signy would be part of Konami's summer portfolio sale? Yes. But did I know that it would be 90%? No, to be honest. Personally, I don't think that was the right move. Discounts without releasing the patch, I say it again, risk hurting the game further. I believe that 100%. Epic Store deal, did I know about this much earlier and agreed to it? Yes, as I mentioned, Epic deals are genuinely valuable, as I said. Again, my concern was the timing and the lack of communication. Kind of I know it sounds a bit more dramatic than it is on paper. It is dramatic, but deep discounts are actually common. They push the algorithm, they bump the visibility and bring new players in and more reviews. So it's not necessarily big discount means the game is not doing well. And so yes, I was involved in these decisions, but not in the way that, as I explained, not in exactly this manner.
Okay, thanks. And we have quite many questions about Steam, so this seems to be the platform that was in a way most dominant for well, our students asking questions. Um, you also said that it has the largest player base. When you now publish on Steam, do you get any kind of support from Valve? How does the platform in a way support developers or publishers?
Not really hand-holding support. They do have some light support, but I don't think it's not really kind of hand-holding as such. It's easy to technically it's possible to self-publish on Steam. There's nothing to it. I mean, their 30% or whatever they get is it hurts the amount they take from per sale. it really hurts the developers, but that's the kind of the monopoly approach that they have at the moment. Um, yeah,
So also from a developer's perspective, you would say that Steam has this kind of monopoly.
I think so. I mean, it's very evident that it is kind of the main store, a digital store. I mean, Epic is trying hard. I mean, with all these Epic store deals that exist, they are trying to get to that, but still, I think they have some way to go with that.
Yeah, didn't miss the button. Something in a way bit different because coming back to one thing you said before, you mentioned that your game was perceived as AAA or double A game because of the graphics and because of the publisher. Do you think that this classification, AAA, double A, indie, is that still useful or bit misleading?
I mean, if I'm applying for an award or funding, I would probably want them to consider me as an indie title so that they they won't misjudge my game. I think nowadays games, it's arguable that even indies are getting to the level of creativity and quality of those with big budget games, but it is still very much relevant, I think, because if an indie game has bugs, it's okay. If a AAA game has bugs, it's less okay. People will will take it differently and will judge it differently because you've got tons of money, you've got hundreds of people working on it. So it's important, I think, still that you have that distinction between what is a small team, what is bigger team, what is a big budget, what is a small budget. I think it's important to identify that as well. But from a creative side of things, I think it's less relevant because nowadays you're getting a lot of hits done by indie titles as well.
Okay, and you just said it with the community, so you'd say that also the indie communities are more forgiving than are the expectations linked to these double and triple A titles?
I mean, generally, they're more forgiving when they have a story of this person is sitting in the mother's garage and working from there. So it's more forgiving when you have that story. So, I think they are a bit more patient when it comes to indie titles. They are critical, of course. Everybody is critical of everything these days, but I think if a big super title that they're waiting for 6 years comes out and it's really messy, I don't think they're going to be forgiving at all. So that makes a big difference.
I'm just going to switch again because you mentioned releases, and I think also in our seminar we've talked about the matter of releasing a full game on release day, basically, or releasing sort of patches. Or Martin and I, we definitely talked about it with No Man's Sky, I believe, that upon release it was really not the best kind of game, but the patches improved upon it so that now it's actually really good and well playable game. Do you think releasing patches makes it easier to release and perhaps even quicker to release games, or do you think that we should go back to, I don't know, the early 2000s to have, one hard copy of a release game and then that would be it? What's your take on it,
I
both
mean,
from a
now
business kind?
Yeah, I think nowadays it's kind of inevitable to have a day one patch. Everybody talks about it as if it's part of the release, like, oh, it buys us more time. From a dev perspective, it's definitely because they need to submit the game way in advance. So by the time they submit the game to the publisher until the game is out, you have a few. I mean, depending also if you have a physical release or not. If you have physical release, you have to wait even more. That's something I didn't calculate for. Now I know it's quite a long wait. So until that wait, during that time, so developers benefit from that opportunity and continue working on improving some of the things that they didn't have time to improve on. So they rely on, oh, there's a day one patch, which is now it's more common than ever before. That's from a dev perspective. From a player's perspective, I also think that it's important for players to, some players really enjoy the whole feedback thing, right? They go back and say, "There's this. Can you update this?" And then they're waiting for the updates. I think it's a whole community building part of the whole the kind of a modern approach of community, I guess, is to get the players involved and they feel part of that process. And I think it doesn't hurt to get these updates today with all the internet and all the new tech, it's easy to get updates for, unlike the old days when you had that one CD and that was it. But I'm up for that. I think as long as it's managed updates, as long as it's not all over the place, as long as the whole game is out and is completely bad and you're only relying on updates, then I think it's fine.
Okay. I'm not quite sure if Martin has a question. Okay, good. Then
Go for it.
I'm just going to go on. It will switch a bit from the patch and Steam topic more towards the question of designing the game. I'm not quite sure how much you can say about that, but one of our students wrote down that how important is difficulty, and you mentioned the difficulty because reviewers mentioned it. How much is that important for the game, kind of to up the difficulty perhaps a bit, to keep players sort of involved in the game for a bit longer? And I think we had one question about the sort of addictive loops that you play in a game. Does that matter while designing the game, or is basically the story comes first and then everything else follows? Or are there certain things you need to be thinking of in the back of your mind that make the game not just more playable, but more engaging in a way for players?
Addiction. So I think
It's very much in inverted commas.
Let's start with the addiction stuff. I mean,
Oh God.
it all depends on what you're trying to make and with what goals, I guess. So about addiction can mean many things, right? Some healthy, some not. Talking about games here, just follow me. Just in action games, for example, the addiction is satisfaction. You have a challenge, you master it, it pays off, right? So, or even how satisfactory the kill is, or the destruction is, or how humiliating it was for the opponent, and so on. We can go on with that. In narrative games, the hook is the story itself, right? And in mobile or fast casual games, kind of the addiction often becomes a dopamine strategy, as they call it, which we kind of avoid those tricks. So we encourage it to be similar to the kind of addiction that is like, oh, it's a good ice cream or a good chocolate that we want to come back to, rather than addicted to drugs or alcohol. So it depends on the type of game it is. Difficulty must feel fair, to answer your difficulty part. So readable, danger, the clear patterns, if depending on the game style, of course, room for player to develop their skills, to master the game. So in my opinion, perhaps engagement is the real goal, not manipulation, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Did I
that makes
answer your
sense.
questions? I don't know. We had a
Yes.
bit of too many questions, but I hope I answered them.
Yes. No, it's probably me doing the I have one question and then it's secretly four questions, basically in the trench coat. Because I mean, we've been talking about sort of storyboarding in a way at least, as well as reviews. So and I mean, we did talk when we talked the first time. We did talk about representation, and your game obviously has a female main character. I was wondering, how were the responses to that? Simply because I remember like Assassin's Creed, where a female main character was one of the problems, and test players wanted male characters for various reasons, I suppose. And I was wondering, so how much does representation or the question of visibility of, for instance, BIPOC characters or of gender, etc., how much does that matter? Or is it something that is just something that happens retroactively but doesn't really feature into the story planning, game planning process?
For us, it absolutely has zero influence. I'll explain. Not only in character design, but also not like in storytelling or not even in recruitment or hiring. We can talk about that in a bit. So representation, in my opinion, should be natural, not forced. It should rule of thumb here is never force anything in any medium, games, stories, or movies. First question is always, does this fit the world? Does it fit the world, the tone, the character's story? For historically grounded settings, accuracy matters. So artificial diversity breaks the immersion and kind of disrespected context, right? So even in fantasy, there are things that need to be respected. There are thousands of rich cultures globally, so you don't need to really inject modern politics into stories that were never built for them anyways. So example, we originally had two pilots for Signy, right? So one is a guy and another one was Ava, the pilot that we have. And it was more supposed to be a game where it feels like the Top Gun approach. The guy is a bit more of a happy, chappy, go lucky guy, and Ava is a bit more kind of focused. And then we had to revisit the whole game scope, and we had to cut down into choosing one character. And we chose Ava. We did not have any political agendas, or we weren't campaigning for any other things. It just happened that Ava happens to be a girl, fits better in the story, and works very well. So Ava is a brave, young, strong female character. We didn't really have to pump her muscles up and give her big bazookas to make, and then tell her go fight with the boys to make her feel like a strong woman. That's not the representation of what we wanted to do. So there are other ways that you can get that message across, like the Alien movie did with Ripley, for example, and other examples. So yeah, nothing forced, 100% focusing on what works, is what I would say.
Okay, now you of course mentioned the hiring process, and we talked about that. But could you comment on that simply to frame that in this case?
So when we hire somebody, so I got asked this question before in an interview, and like, oh, what about the CVs and your diversity in hiring and everything else? And I'm like, we don't really care. We don't actually have time to care. We don't have time to sit and look at who has which background. Naturally, my team is diverse naturally without any specific agendas. And the way we tackle this is that we look at portfolios first because of our industry is creative. So who am I hiring? Usually I'm hiring artists or programmers. These are the main things I'm hiring most of the time, right? So I don't really care who the person is as long as they, first of all, know how to do the job. And second of all, of course, I would like to know if they fit in the culture and if their personalities they're good people, so that's also good. So where we start? We start by checking their portfolio, not their CV. And if we see that, I'm liking this work, so the portfolio is interesting, I go to the CV because I want to know who this person is. And if I like the CV, I invite that person for an interview. Now, remember, until this moment, I don't even know if it's a girl or boy or who it is. I have no clue and I don't really care. So, and that's when we, for the first time, see each other on interview. And that's where kind of we establish the personalities, whether we click, it doesn't click, whether we feel that this person can come in. We had ones which we had a very strong programmer. I think it was a senior programmer, very, very powerful CV, very good work that he's done, and we would have loved to have him. But when we met him, and my brother was next to me, after that call, we were like, nope, I think this personality there's too much ego, there's whatever. So we had these points that we said, both of us together, and because of that reason, that's another example of everything else fit in terms of portfolio, but the personality didn't, because we thought this was going to be always a conflict here, And so that's how we tackle hiring. We first of all look at portfolio, then we check the CV. So degrees are important to a certain level, but even if you come and wave all your diplomas in my face, but you don't really know how to do the job, then that's going to be a major problem. So I think it needs to really go hand in hand. So you have your degree and then you work on your portfolio on the side, because you're going to be making a fool out of yourself first before making me suffer. If you can't do the job, then it's a big problem. So I don't know if it was clear, but that's how we tackled hiring recruitment, both from a diversity perspective, if you want to see, and from a degree perspective.
That sounds good. I think we had one student who was really interested in sort of, do you need an academic degree in order to sort of get your foot into the gaming industry, especially behind the scenes? Or does degree matter? Like, could someone with an English literature degree sort of approach you and get hired? Just technically.
I mean, look at me. I've got a politics degree and a management degree. So my point is that you don't really need to have a programming or an art background to be involved in the gaming industry, right? You have transferable skills, and there are various different departments you can be involved in. I mean, remember, you making the game is only part of the whole gaming scene. There are other things behind the scenes, like you can be a community manager, you can be a localization business, you can be Since you're doing languages, you can really, there's a lot to do in the localization part of things. There is a lot to do in the QA and testing, and that's a different kind of you don't have to really be only a gamer to be able to test that. You have to be you have to have a different kind of mindset to be able to do a QA. There is management, there's production management, being a producer. You've got in sales and distribution, you can be the backhand in the storefront, store pages, managing that. There's tons of different things you can do. You don't really need to have a programming or art degree to be able to join the gaming industry.
Following up on that, because linked to this question of which degree does matter was also the question how important location is to become connected, to make connections.
I mean, location is important, I have to say, but obviously nowadays you have everybody's working from home. There is that remote working. In my opinion, I think people are going back when it comes to the creative sector back in the office, but they're having some common sense approach, which is let's have a hybrid situation here. That's what we do. We have in office because we believe that it's important, especially when you're in a small team, to be in the same room when you're discussing creative ideas. It's just better than wasting time chatting on whatever platforms you have or jumping on calls or trying to figure out who's available. It just doesn't make sense. If you are doing software development, that's okay. Even, I mean, to be honest, there are certain areas within game development where you can actually do work from home, and we support that. There's no problem. In terms of location, it is important. I think, I mean, I come from an area where geographically industry doesn't exist. Degrees in this industry that didn't exist, and so being there didn't really give us the access to opportunities that we have now in the UK. So being in the UK, for example, you guys in Europe, I think you have access to a lot of government support, funding, events, massive events. I mean, you've got Gamescom around the corner from you guys, maybe not that much around the corner, but it's close by, I guess. And then you've got GDC and stuff, and sometimes it could be very expensive, of course, I understand, but there are a lot of local events that you can see in Europe. I mean, in Scotland, we have lots of them, so I don't know about Germany. And I encourage everybody to, whether it's companies or individuals trying to get into this, to attend these events and not just attend and watch, but attend and go and talk to people and network and show your work, try to make connections. These do help. And so location does help depending on what we're talking about, as explained.
Yeah, networking in the art sector is really, really important. I think that this is something you don't really get around for some reason.
Yeah.
Because we mentioned sort of it, we mentioned location and you mentioned localization. I was wondering how much, especially with selling the game or promoting it, how much does localization matter? I mean, not just in the sense of that you're translating the game into a different language, in the sense of that you have to, that idioms work in that target language, etc. But I was wondering, how much do you do cultural translations? Does that play a role, or is it just a game that is very much sort of set and focused on, I'm calling it Western societies in inverted commas, but like Europe, the UK, the US, etc., etc.?
100%. It's not only pure translation. I think it's definitely, localizing. That's why it's called localization and not translation. I think it's very important for games to be localized, 100%. We localized Signy, I think, around 13 or 14 different languages. We didn't do voiceover in all the languages. We did voiceover in 6 languages, but subtitles in the rest. I would encourage any game to localize as many languages as possible. There are obviously the list of the top 10 languages to localize. That's common in the industry. They don't always stick to that, but it's important because when you're telling a joke in a game or when something is funny, it may not sound the same when you're translating it into a different language. So it's very important to take that culture aspect or take that, language aspect into consideration and not only 100% just translate word by word. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And simply because we're talking about like translation, but also hiring processes, and I've just come from teaching a class on it. How much does AI matter? Because nowadays, every single, whether it's creative industries or whether it's any other kind of industry, they're all kind of starting to rely on it. So I was wondering, do you plan on including it? If you do, in how far in this case? And if you don't, which I think that's one of the, I'm not quite sure if it's the same thing in the gaming industry, but I was wondering, are you going to include it, or are you saying, you know what, this is not something I want to do? Or what's your stance on it?
Um, AI. So, I mean, things are evolving. Systems and programs kind of are becoming better, faster, more accessible, and AI is one good example, of course, but not to adapt with this or kind of integrated elements of it into your existing pipeline or workflow, I think is not really wise. So, but it must be done in the right way, in my opinion. So we consider AI as just another tool at this point. And by the way, these tools have actually existed for decades. I mean, for a long time. I mean, if you use Photoshop, there are features in Photoshop, or if you use the, I don't know, 3D Max, we use 3D Max, there are procedural 3D plugins in 3D Max, which exist, and these are all AI. So this isn't new as people think. These softwares that we use actually have these AI tools integrated. But from kind of to get back to the question, and I know what you mean in this modern context of AI, we've only recently started exploring modern AI tools, in our case, and even then only in a very limited and practical capacity for kind of very specific tasks, like for example textures. You know, so the key difference is how experienced artists use AI versus how the general public use it through prompting. So in production, AI is useful, but only in very narrow and controlled ways, because despite the hype and how it's been advertised from production aspects, it really does suck at majority of things, and especially direction and control, to be very honest. So now I'm not a tech guy. This question is probably better fit for my brother, but I give you one example of how it can be useful. So in Sydney, for instance, we had to go through lots of NASA footage to paint a collage of a large landscape of clouds and terrain taken from space for one of our levels. So it was difficult finding the right light tonality, and took one artist a whole week putting the image together. If we had AI, which in itself is trained on NASA footage, I think, we would have probably used it to create all these identical images we needed with the same lighting tone, and probably save us all that browsing and excessive color grading time kind of needed, while getting it done in less than half the time, in my opinion. So yes, we use AI as tools, but only where it genuinely saves time and doesn't compromise artistic direction. For now, it is just another useful time-saving tool if we kind of know how to use it right.
That sounds good, because I feel like, especially in the creative sector, people have been, it's a very Marmite kind of thing. Either you love it or you hate it, but there's very little middle ground. So this is quite nice to hear some kind of middle ground and sort of seeing it as a tool and not so much as we need to rely on it now. Um, because we're talking about it, and it sounds actually, frankly, quite fun. So what's the balance between the fun and creative side of things? And I mean, you're doing business. Most people don't probably think of business being fun and creative, but it sounds very much like it. And what's the balance between the fun and the creative part, and the more technical, or as I think I wrote down, the tedious part?
Well, it depends on who you ask, as you said. So if you're asking the business guy or the artist, in short, it could be organized chaos, sometimes disorganized chaos, regardless of how much we try to organize it. So, I mean, creative fun. I mean, I'd say technical or production work is far more than the creative fun aspect of it, from my perspective. There's a lot of business side of things that people don't take into consideration. And the creative guys who are doing art all the time even have to go through tedious tasks that they have to accomplish. I mean, it's normal. It's in any industry. You have things that, it's going to be fun eventually when you get to that, but you really have to pass through this stage. So I would say roughly, I think technical and production work more. Creative fun has its moments, but it's a bit all over the place.
Has its moments, as in every job in this case. Martin,
Yeah,
you switched.
I switched, yes.
Yeah.
Because you said that people don't take into consideration some things, and we're talking about the time aspect anyways. Was that the question how time consuming it is to start your own development, and which things are very often overlooked by people?
Sometimes I think we share the same brain cell because
Kind
that
of.
was literally the next question.
Well, I mean, how difficult it is to start. Look, here in the UK, I cannot talk about, I mean, generally speaking, I think if you do statistics, majority of small indie companies that are usually started by group of programmer friends who just graduated, come together. They're like, oh, we want to make games. We're so passionate about making games, and which is fine. And then they forget that they are running a business, and this is where it can go wrong. A lot of things that they don't take into account is, who's doing the legal stuff, who's negotiating the deals, who's talking to the publishers, who's liaising with the publishers during the production time, who's submitting the milestone reports, who's dealing with payroll, and if you have staff members, who's taking care of the money, and who's doing the tax returns. I mean, there's tons of things happening, right? And who's project managing. And if a lot of people tell me I'm the lead programmer and I'm the business guy, I tell them, I don't believe you, or you're doing something wrong, So I don't think that exists. I mean, during peak production, if you gave me 3 people, I would have given them full-time jobs. So, that's my department alone. So I think how difficult is it to start a company? It's not difficult. You can do it in 5 minutes to start a company. How difficult it is to maintain and to grow a company is very difficult, and it's not really suitable for everybody. Sometimes it's okay for you to be an employee. You don't have to, not everybody should become entrepreneurs. I don't think that's also right. And you just follow your passion. But know one thing, that if you're starting a company, make sure you cover all the aspects of the business, not only the art, if you're an artist, not only the programming, just because you're passionate about that. So if you make a great game and you don't know how to polish it, it's going to look unfinished. If you only know how to polish a game but you don't focus on the gameplay, then you're not really into the gaming business, are you? So you might as well go back to animation and visual effects. And if you're doing both very well and you don't know how to sell it, you're going to only create beautiful things and put them in a drawer forever. Like it's not going to go anywhere. So, or you're not going to meet the timelines because you are perfectionist and you always want to polish your stuff. So there's nobody telling you stop. There are all these factors you need to take into account. And I think what we try to do right from the beginning is to bring our professions together under the new umbrella of Keelworks and focus on, we have audio department, we have the art lead, we have the business side, we've got, so all of these, we focused on all these pillars equally. And because we're in the game development, the gameplay was a given factor. So if somebody tells me what makes your studio stand out from the crowd, I would say, well, gameplay is one aspect, let's put that aside, but whatever game we make from now on, it's always going to look good. It's always going to sound good. And if there is story, it's always going to be good story. So we focus parallel on all of these pillars at the same time.
Because we are already talking about, potential next games. By the way, is there a potential next game? Is there something in the works? Is that something you're legally allowed
I think
to
we
say?
said enough for today. I mean,
Fair
yes, of
enough.
course. Yes, of course, we have new games coming out. It's not announced yet, and I shall keep my mouth shut
Yeah.
and not announce anything today. But we are working on a few titles at the same time. Now that we have established the base and the foundations, that was the whole purpose of your first title. We are now developing a couple of other titles and already in discussion with. Well, we're being a bit more picky with the partners this time around. So now that we we can. Yeah.
You have the advantage of having a game that was well received in this case. Do you think it's more important to get your foot in the game than to sort of produce a first title that's very good? So is it a bit of a mix of both? So what would you have done if Signy would have been okay received and not well received in this case?
I mean, look, I had different criteria in my mind. So I had a checkbox when I wanted to sign Signy with Konami. And of course, Konami had their own checkbox. My checkbox was not relying on profits from Signy. My checkbox was, okay, you need to prove yourself, deliver a quality game on time, on budget, make sure your publisher is happy and they recoup their cost and make £1 profit. That was my tick boxes was very clear. Get nominated for at least one award, and deliver on time and on budget. And I think from my checklist, we've done all that. So it doesn't necessarily mean whether Signy was successful or not. We talked about that. It has its context and the reasoning behind the sales and the numbers. That's not important because that was never part of my main goal. I never signed up for Signy to make me a millionaire and retire, at this age and go home. My point was the long term and in the people in Konami, to give them credit, of course, because we never had issues with Konami working with them and they're really good people. And their aim was also, let's do this game first and then we focus on the long term. However, nobody calculated about, the senior management team is going to change exactly during our launch time. So, uh, yeah, if I want to do something differently, I would probably put that in my risk assessment. President of Konami is going to change exactly during my launch time, and he's not going to approve my patch. Okay, that's going to be added to my risk. So that's, again, to circle back to your question, I think we did what we can for this game while setting up a studio. I think that was the main purpose of it. We delivered on time, on budget. It was a quality game, both technically, a lot of technical challenges in this game, and also the quality of art. So we're proud of that, and we're just building on the lessons learned and the pipelines built internally, so that we focus on the long term going forward.
What were like 3 lessons learned that you thought were most important going into the next phase, basically, or the next games? That's a
3.
difficult question. I mean, you can give us more,
Can I
but
give you 50? I mean,
go for it. I think we have a couple of minutes.
no, just kidding.
No.
I mean, I think what I would say is that you calculate for buffer. Usually, when you're doing any project, you calculate for 10% buffer. In video games, you calculate for 35%, maybe 40% buffer. So definitely calculate for the worst case scenario, I would say. And yeah, that would be my first one, other than adding to the risk management that the changes might happen, and usually the decisions that actually hurt you most are the ones that they're not under your control. So you need to really focus on that. Another thing I would say is probably dealing with programmers and artists is a different thing. I know this is a bit of an awkward answer, but I realize that different species, that you can have to. It feels like it when you're working on the ground. So you have to be very careful. The communication with programmers is a bit different, and the communication with artists is different. I'm not saying this in a negative way. It's an observation from somebody who's not either of them. And it was interesting to learn, because in my previous job, for example, I had a different kind of people I was working with. They had different kind of skill sets, and it was different, different expectations from that, and when it comes to programmers, the communication changes. When it comes to artists, the communication changes. And the challenge was, how do you bring these two worlds together and meet halfway? That has been one challenge for me that I learned a lot from, and now I know, obviously, but it was an interesting experience to go through to go through that phase. Was it already 3, or do you want the third one as well? I think I probably answered the question here and there and everywhere.
I mean, if you have one more lesson, I can totally understand the programmer and sort of artist communication. I get that. But yeah, if you have one more, we'd love to hear it.
Can't think of something. I'll think of something. You think about your next question. I'll think about something.
Okay. Then I'll just go on to the. I think I put it down as a final question, but I think it works really well here. And then I would probably open the floor to our students to ask more questions if they have any. So this is, again, more or less the final one. What or which current changes that you observe currently in the game industry, which ones of those worry you the most, and which ones do you give most hope, so to speak?
What worry me most, obviously, there's more rising costs, and the development process take longer, and then there's more pressure. These obviously concern me as well as the fact that a lot of studios are being closed down recently, especially the smaller studios. And what concerned me is the big studios are getting lots of money and making stupid decisions and making big mistakes, and they're not succeeding, which is then allowing investors to pull the plug. And those sort of decisions actually do impact on smaller studios like ourselves. So that is concerning. But there is hope. There is hope because every kind of and the industry at the moment is in this worst situation and for a long time now. And just like everything else, you go down and then it's going to come up again. So hopefully we're in this starting to go up. I'm hopeful for that. What also gives me hope is that creativity, if you ask me personally, I mean, relatively speaking, still comes mostly from the smaller studios rather than the bigger AAA studios. And I'm hopeful that small studios are creating good games, are succeeding with smaller teams, smaller budgets. So that gives me hope. And I just hope that we will have less risk managers and more creative investors when it comes to publishers and to funders, because that can help push ideas forward rather than recycle or kind of make remakes all the time. Funding new IPs is very important. Um, that's kind of what I think. I can get back to giving you one more to answer your previous question. I just thought about something. So I think I would say communicating the game's identity far more aggressively and clearly. So if the players misunderstand what type of game you made, they start by playing the wrong game in their head. You know what I mean? So tutorials, trailers, store pages, all of these kind of matter as much as the game itself. So if people skip the tutorial and think the game is unfair, that's partly a communication failure from the dev side. So I would push harder on messaging, tutorials, onboarding, and visibility of key features. You have to assume that nobody is reading and communicate accordingly. So I think that would be my next point when it comes to thinking about our lessons there.
That sounds like a good lesson in this case. Um, so I'd say let's open the floor to questions. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, I'm not quite sure if you need to request being audible in this case, or if you can simply switch on your microphone and ask a question, but I'd say we invite both. So I'm going to ask the question that happens in every seminar at least once. Do you have any questions? Or maybe Meher, do you have questions for us?
Um, how do you see I don't know, I'm just coming up with the question now. How do you see your course and your area of focus at the moment fit in with the gaming industry from your perspective this time?
Okay, so questions from others. No, moving on to, that's a good question. So I thought we were the ones asking the tough questions here. I think,
You asked for it.
yeah, fair enough. I asked for it. I think I'm not quite sure with the gaming industry, but perhaps it's some kind of feedback that games need to be taken seriously. I think the problem, especially with academia, has been that academia has shied away from video games in general. And I think it could be interesting to have this kind of exchange, like having developers or programmers or art directors or the people behind the scenes come in and give their perspective, because I think that's often kind of missing in academia. It's very, we do theory and we look at the games, and we could give, or could be an interesting exchange to be made between the game industry and academia, if academia takes it seriously, and vice versa to a certain degree. So I think it could be simply at this point a good exchange to communicate certain issues, to think about, exactly what you said, what goes on behind the scenes, because what we focus on is the game, but often we don't know, as you said, the context behind it. So having a look at that is really a valuable sort of addition to our teaching in this case.
I mean, cool. To add on that, I guess, as we mentioned earlier, that there are a lot of transferable skills, and there are a lot of areas that require people with different approaches. When I come in from a completely business aspect of it, and I observe Not you don't need a genius or Einstein to figure things out. You can observe having different point of views. You can say that this publisher clearly has communication problems. He could be great in game evaluations or playing more games than me, but he seriously has management and communication problems. And this is where, different skill set can fit in. I think there are a couple of people who have ideas about how to answer, how to add to this. So,
Yes,
Yep, go for
I've
it.
heard. So absolutely go for it. We'd like to hear your comment on that, because this was obviously a very I'm a teacher at university kind of comment. So I'm not quite sure what our students say. So if either or could have a go at it, we'd love to hear it.
Thank you. I'm thinking about when I go to the opera or theater. Very often you have this 30 minutes beforehand where they tell you about the play, the background, everything. So there's always a connection between art and academia. And I think as video games are part of art and of our culture, it is important to go through this in academia as well, to kind of give the same access to it that literature and opera and all the other kinds of arts have.
That's a good point. So we're the 30-minute contextualization in this case. Not quite sure if has a different answer or
Yes, I do.
Oh, perfect.
First of all, thank you very much that you're taking the time here. It's really great to have to be able to talk to somebody in this field. We've talked about the academia stuff, but in this course there are many students who would study to become a teacher. And I think that talking about video games and talking about video games in the academic sense is important to train your media skills and your media competences, which I think is somewhat of a taboo topic in education, in family, in parenting, and also in schools, because you have to keep up with what your students are interested in, and you have to keep up with what they're concerned about and what is going on. And we have a lot of really problematic things going on, and really problematic things that are being problematized. Is that a word? I don't know. I think you know what I mean. By media and by politicians, and by bringing these topics into academia, we can now train ourselves to be able to counter these false statements, these false arguments, and bring a more grounded and more versatile perspective on these things. And we can communicate with our future students and maybe our future children in a far more better way when we actually try to understand what's going on there and don't just look at video games like, oh, it's entertainment, it's not political, it's not important. You do you, I do my stuff, and I don't care.
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah.
Meher, what do you think? I mean, apart from that, we've taken about 1.5 hours of your day. Where do you see advantages of something like this? I mean, this is obviously a very extended and very low-key interview to some degree, or conversation. So, I mean, apart from us kindly asking you to do it, what were your reasons, or what do you think? Where do you think the advantages are, or are not in this
I mean,
case?
I think it's important to raise awareness about a different industry. I think people again have not intentionally, but they have a limited knowledge about certain things. I don't like playing games. I'm not interested in this industry, but then they don't realize that actually they can contribute. I mean, just like we heard two completely different answers, but they all are valid from different perspectives, right? You can tackle this from however angle you want. Some people are only interested in the marketing aspect and the PR aspect of games. They don't, I know a lot of people who are involved in the gaming industry. They don't play games, but they are like, well, I'm actually marketing this game. They play that game, obviously. They play the game that they're marketing, and that they play some games, but they're not like 100 playing games 24/7 like others would who are in the industry, majority of them. So it's okay not to be interested in games, but contribute to different aspects of it. For example, like localization, like, these sort of things. When you're dealing with languages, you can actually contribute to how localization works. You can actually dive deep into it and figure out different systems. You can have a better understanding about how to manage a community. That's a lot of social skills and patience involved in that. That's not for everybody. Some people can go crazy with that. So there are a lot of different aspects that require different kind of skill sets to deliver that. And I think from that perspective, having these open conversations, having these natural discussions, I guess, it just creates that sort of an awareness, which already is helpful. It gets people thinking, gets people looking, and it also helps the industries, because the industry needs now that healthy kind of diversity without an agenda, because that helps with getting things done in the right way. And I guess I just encouraged. I guess I encourage that from that win-win aspect.
Okay, that sounds good. Not quite sure, Martin, do you have
No
something?
further questions.
I'm not quite sure. I'm always pointing at you, but no one can see you actually. But we have has his hand up,
Oh yeah, he does.
virtually at least.
Yes, yes. Okay, yeah, you can hear me. So I have two questions. The first question is if I can just say Meher as well. Is that fine to you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, nice. So Meher, if you would have the opportunity or the money to hire someone right now to do a research project on Signy, what would the research project be about? Maybe especially looking more into humanities.
On Signy, on generally just
On Signy.
it has to be
Yeah.
on Signy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, what could that be? That's an interesting question. There are different, from a social perspective. I guess one thing I'm thinking about is the community aspect of it, the feedback aspect of it, to analyze in more depth the psychology behind all the feedback that we receive and all the validity of that. I mean, I told you I've done that to a certain degree, but there are different platforms and there are thousands of them. So, that would be an interesting case study to present and see how people are thinking. I would probably also think about a different question about what I said, whether there is any validity to my claims that I thought that people are looking at us as a AAA studio because they see all these big logos. So that could be another social kind of different aspect of perception. And also from languages perspective and different kind of story, cultural localization aspect, there's a lot of different kind of research work that can be done in that area. So I don't know, I just came up randomly with the three different things that just popped into my head. I don't know if these are interesting. I don't know if that helps.
It helps. It sounds very interesting. And yeah, but another person has a question.
Yes, thank you, Judith, to tell me how to raise my hand. I have found it now. Yes, because we talked about location, and we are here in Germany. Do you know any German game developers or even games?
I do know game developers. I know, I think Joystick Studios. I know Henrik from there, but I mean, it's not going to help you if I throw out names now. But I do know a few game developers because I do also travel to Germany for Gamescom a lot. So I do meet people, and for international events, I meet them as well. I don't know if there was a hidden hidden question behind the question, where we're getting with this. But I mean, yes, I do know people, and I don't necessarily know a lot of games, but I know their games.
Not really hidden. I'm just a big fan of the Dalek, which is German. So
Okay.
I was just wondering if something from Germany has reached you. Let's say it this way.
I mean, yes, through the people I know, yes, but don't ask me names because I'm not really good with names in terms of the game titles and stuff. But I do know studio heads and studios in Germany that I'm friendly with.
I mean, on that note, I mean, Martin and I are co-teaching. Is there something, not co-teaching, but sort of working together between studios? Is that done, or is it usually that you keep in your own studio and then you just do you and everyone else does other stuff? Or is there some kind of cooperation between either creative cooperation or business cooperation between different studios?
I mean, of course, there obviously already the publishing aspect is working with other studios because they do the distribution side and we do the development. So that's one element. But there are a lot of studios who do co-development work. So they have a project where they both work on it. There are a lot of studios who don't manage with time and they outsource some of the elements of the development. So they work with studios. In our case, we outsource the porting of the game. So the porting means that we make the game on PC and the porting makes it work on a Nintendo. Well, we don't, our game doesn't work on Nintendo, but PlayStation and Xbox. So they made that work. But obviously, we have to be involved in the process because there's a lot of optimization work that needs to happen. So we always work with the other studios depending on what the task is.
Judith. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going back and forth with the questions, but I was wondering, how does a portfolio look like? I assume that there are different kinds of portfolios, depending on where you're applying for or what job you're applying for. But for a game developer or a game designer, do you actually have to have experience in developing things and have to show your models or your small games or stuff like that? Or how could it look like?
Very good question. I can answer that. So when you're applying for, and depending on if you're applying for an internship or if you're applying for like a starter position, then you don't necessarily need to have a portfolio as such. You can usually the bigger companies will take you if they have 100 programmers, you can be the 101. And if you take your time learning, it's not going to really matter, right? Because they can afford to, and they have tons of others, and they're not really relying on you. They're just preparing you for the future. So that's one thing to take into account, and it exists, although it's difficult to get in, but it exists. Smaller studios, however, like myself, I'm hiring someone because I need that person to deliver straight away. I don't have time, I don't have budgets, I don't have the capacity to always focus on, while it's my priority to help self-development, and I always encourage that. And I have two examples. When I got in interns from universities here locally, and now I got three, and two of them are hired full-time, and they're full-time employees of mine for 2.5, 3 years now. So I have that example as well. But you really need to go in, and they're graduates, so they had their masters already, and they had a lot of work. Our sound designer came in as a intern, and I hired him because he proved himself that he can deliver. And I told him, I said, I can give you training, I can give you guidance, but I'm not going to hold your hand here. So you need to prove to me that you deserve to stay here, because I don't have time. I don't have a manager who manages a manager who manages the interns. It's just you're working directly with you have to really catch up. And also when it comes to portfolios, these people, when I'm hiring an artist like an animator, I need to see that animator I'm hiring, because I don't have the luxury of 6, 7 animators. I will probably have one. In Sydney, we had one animator. I mean, I'm lucky because my brother knows how to animate as well. So if the animator doesn't know anything, he can go and show him how to do it. But that's a luxury that other companies maybe don't have. So in my case, if I'm hiring that one animator, I need to really see the portfolio of the animations, because what's the point of bringing that person in? And I have, for example, in Sydney, 4, 5, 6-legged creatures with tentacles sticking out. If he's not going to know how to animate that, then what's the point of hiring him? So I need to see that in advance. Same with the modelers. So I do a lot of models. Here's my portfolio. I'm like, well, these are all 2D kind of really simple models. If you see our work, if I put you in that modeling team, which is modeling team of 3 people, are you going to look bad? Are you, first of all, for yourself? Is it going to be, are you going to manage? you're going to completely hate the industry if I put you there, because you're not going to manage. So just think about it when you're applying. Does it fit? It doesn't help when you just scatter CVs around. So I don't know if I managed to answer your question, but that's what I mean by portfolio. I think it really does matter for smaller teams to have a good portfolio, even for programmers. Show me what you can do, because it could be a waste of time for everybody. And that's what happened with us with the UI. I had to redo the whole UI, and I was late with it. That's why we couldn't manage to finish it properly. But that's lessons learned.
Okay, yeah, question being answered. So I'd say, because we don't have any questions left, last call to the round here. Are there any open questions that you would like to address?
I have one last question.
Go ahead.
Go on.
Yeah, yeah. So looking at the whole company, what would you say are the most inspiring games for you? Maybe for the development of Signy, maybe for the development of any future titles currently.
Well, we're big fans of Diablo, and I played a lot of Red Alert and strategy games. So that's my personal take. If you ask my brother, he will sit down with you and tell you the analysis of every single game that he's inspired by. So I would say that we don't only get our inspiration from games, but also movies. For example, when we were doing Signy, the whole idea was not to create a bullet dodger, because the type of game that Signy is, it was designed for the arcade machines. They had smaller screens, they had narrower screens. So what we tried to do is try to get the concept of the arcade, the traditional good old arcade games, and make a cinematic version of it that works on your massive TVs at home, which is a vertical, right? So then the questions come, how do you get the ship moving from one corner of the TV to the other corner with the right speed, the right accuracy, all these sort of things. So one of the main design elements and inspirations that we got was obviously the traditional games like Gradius and all the rest of it, but also we wanted the game to play like Star Wars in the sky and Starship Troopers on the ground, because we have also ground units going on. And so that was the whole concept of it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to dodge every single bullet. It's impossible. Sometimes you get hit, but that you need to manage your health and your shield. So inspiration for Signy was not only games, it's the traditional arcade games, but also some movies.
Thanks.
Yeah, just really quickly, because you kind of just mentioned it, how important is a game to you once you have basically finished developing it, and it's distributed and like the first 2 patches, for example, are out? So how much mind space does it really take up anymore in comparison to new titles?
Games are like your babies. You really need to take care of them. Plus, you have duties. You have duties to your clients, to your customers, sorry, who bought the game, the community who are there, who are playing it actively, and they're really supporting your game. You have duty of care towards them. So I would say is that, when you make a game and you forget about it, it's not right, because you need to constantly pay attention to that. That's why you need to have community managers to be able to interact with these communities, answer their ongoing questions. They might have all sorts of questions, the serious ones. I'm not talking about the ones who are just there to clown around. And updates are very important because it shows you the importance of listening to that feedback and making the product even better for their experiences. So I think from a humane and moral perspective, we have duty of care to those customers, and that's why we don't just make a game, release it, make the first 2 patches, and then forget about it. Obviously, you need to have a good balance of, you cannot constantly rely on that, because then you cannot make a living out of it only with relying on one title. You need to constantly support that, while in parallel develop your pipeline and workflow that you can develop the new titles as well, and the capacity for the new titles to fit in.
So, if we don't have any further hands being raised, then I'd say we can conclude that here, to not sit there in awkward silence to wait if somebody finds another question. So from our side, thank you, Meher, for being here, for spending the time with us and answering tons of questions. And well, nearly all of them, apart from Fatsy's question about NDA relevant stuff.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry. I should have known. It was
it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. All the best of luck with whatever journeys and careers you guys are gonna lead. And it's important that you were interested in this in the industry, and for having me to just casually talk to you guys about these things. And I really hope that it was interesting for most of you guys. And yeah, all the best of luck.